Welcome to the Dream Power Show. I'm your host, Debbie Spector Weissman, the Dream Coach. One of my favorite pastimes is looking at family photos. When I was a kid, I loved poring over the picture albums my mother kept stored in the bottom drawer of the buffet cabinet in our dining room. What fun it was trying to find the family resemblances. For instance, I saw that my grandfather had the same curly hair that I do, and my father's cousin looked a little bit like my older sister. I don't know what became of those old pictures, though I think one of my sisters has them hidden away in some storage closet. I have lots of new pictures to look at, those of my kids and grandchildren. My little granddaughter has dimples just like I do, but she has a bright shock of red hair that I think she got from my husband's side of the family. And even though my kids have their own distinctive looks, there are enough similarities between them to see that they're brother and sister. My point here is that we carry our outward characteristics from generation to generation. Did you also realize that we do the same with our internal behaviors? It's called emotional DNA, and the thoughts, feelings, and actions we inherit have a lot to do with how we relate to our families and others. My guest today, Judy Wilkins Smith, has studied these patterns for years, and she's here to explain why we should pay more attention to them. Judy is a highly regarded organizational expert and the founder of System Dynamics for individuals and organizations. Welcome to the Dream Power Show, Judy.
Debbie, it's lovely to be with you today.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, Judy, did I explain emotional DNA correctly? Is it something we all carry inside us?
You explained it beautifully. Yes, absolutely. We don't just inherit our physical DNA, we inherit our emotional DNA. And it's exactly what you said. It's the patterns of thoughts, feelings, and actions that we carry with us that are passed down from generation to generation. And in fact, many studies now show that an event creates an imprint on the system that supersedes just the person it affects. It travels down for many generations. So we may wonder why we're angry or sad or fearful in a particular area of our lives. And this is why.
That is fascinating because, it's like, my son has the same blue eyes my husband has, but it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter. Nothing affects that. But it's interesting how, the emotions can be carried down and do this. So tell me, I mean, how does this happen? I mean, why does something that caused my great grandfather to be angry uh, trigger something in me that makes me angry?
So we're very, very faithful repositories of everything that happens in our systems. It looks a little bit like this. We have an event. The event creates an immediate reaction in the person who's affected, and they begin to make choices. So first there are thoughts, and then there are feelings, or the other way around. We're never too sure. But very quickly, we start to have this reaction to the event. And from that, we start to make language. Be very careful when you don't ever, make sure you never. And so what do we do with that? We then speak it into our world. So we're reinforcing it for ourselves, but we're also reinforcing it for a new generation. And they look at mom and dad and go, well, mom gets sad when, so this is how I fit in. And so they take that on too. Now, the interesting thing about systems is very often the events themselves will pass on remnants. So you will see elements of that repeating. An accident here can become an accident further down. And again, this is because we're saying, don't be careful, watch out. And systems are very elegant organisms. They keep trying to tell us what's happened in the system that's now become a limitation so we can do something with it. Because the beauty of what you said earlier, which was, I have red hair, I understand, or my grandson has red hair, I understand where it comes from, is this. With emotional DNA, it's stronger. It contains all the words, all the thoughts, all the feelings that came down, but with it, the entire potential for you to swing it around. And the minute you swing that around, that begins to swing the entire system. Now it's no longer thinking the same way. It's no longer feeling the same way. It's no longer acting the same way. And you can see that if you have generations where nobody's gone to college and somebody looks at the patterns in the system and goes, well, that's not working for me. I'm doing it differently. And the minute we get the thought of, I need to do it differently or something needs to change, we're into that clue box. Now, if we go back and look at what happened, we can also use it as a fuel to say, here's how I'm going to do it differently.
So, the things I said to my children when they were growing up really didn't necessarily come from me. It came from what I learned from my mother and what she learned from her mother, and so on and so on and so on. So I'm sure we don't realize we're doing this.
Not at all. It is deeply unconscious. People will say to me, but I didn't do that on purpose. No, but you very faithfully inherited all of those pieces and took them on as though they were yours, because that's what systems do. We keep everything humming along and then we adapt and change it. And of course, a system's greatest need is to survive, but its highest ideal is to grow. So it's always looking for that member who's going to switch it up a degree, switch it up a degree. And so that's what happens. You take a word that affects somebody in one way and go, oh, but this could also mean this. See, the other thing we need to know is that we tend to be a little more negative if you look at it that way. We know, here's the danger, watch out. You need to suffer. Good people are humble. So we tend towards that. We don't always remember that there is a flip side to that coin. And it's when we turn the coin over and go, oh, but anger can become love or passion. Sadness can become joy, that we start to turn things around. So they're both our limiters, but they're also our clues as to how to live a bigger, kinder life.
Okay. So how does one go about figuring out what her emotional DNA is?
So this is where I love the genealogy site. Their genealogy 1.0. Here's where I belong. Why this matters is it's genealogy 2.0. Why does that matter? So what you would do is you look at an issue that you have, something that's plagued you for years. And the questions you will ask yourself are, how does it affect me? When did it first show up? What was happening in my life? Is this similar to something that's happened to anyone else in my family before? If I'm excluded, who else was excluded? If I don't do well financially, who else didn't do well financially? Because we then know there is what we call a hidden loyalty to a pattern that hasn't been seen and resolved. So it's become a bit of an exclusion, and it's irritating because it wants to be seen so it can balance and you can move on. So you want to look for what irritates you, and then there are two ends. You want to look at what irritates or limits you, and then you want to go straight to the other side and go, so what do I really want? What is my heart's desire? Because that is your next step. This one that irritates you is actually pushing you to connect with the one that's going to fulfill a heart's desire. That's your true life.
So it is possible to make a break and make new DNA patterns that can then go on to subsequent generations.
It's not only possible, it's absolutely crucial. Every time you shift something, everything else in the system has to realign. It can no longer be the same. So the minute you create even a degree of change, you're affecting that system just a little, just a little, just a little, until eventually it flips. And sometimes if it's a really big pattern, you'll see that the whole piece flip very quickly. I was writing about this recently, and I was saying it literally takes a sentence, a couple of words. You can think about this, generations and generations, or years and years, and somebody walks in and says, the war is over. One sentence. Women can vote. One sentence. It changes everything. But it needed to be seen. Women can't vote. needed to be seen and given a place, because it was what would ignite the shift to say women are seen, they may vote. So I always say to people, don't disrespect what's irritating you, love it and look at it. It is trying to push you forward to your next step in your best life.
Mm. So when you're talking about emotional DNA and basically we're really emphasizing the negative aspects because those are obviously the ones we want to change once
Right.
we become aware of them. But do we also inherit positive?
Absolutely. And those are the ones you want to strengthen, right? And it's interesting. Think about this. The negative ones we pass on as cautions. The positive ones we pass on as something as aspirations. You should be like your father. Your grandfather was incredible. We're actually telling our story all the time. And if we really pay attention, we can see where the difficulties are, and we can see where the aspirational pieces are. But we tend to lock into the difficulties.
Well, Judy, I always like to hear about examples of how this plays out in practice. So, do you have an example of how working with discovering emotional DNA helped somebody that you've dealt with?
Gosh, so many, so many. I mean, I'm blessed. I get to work with this every day. I had somebody who came in who I think will probably always stick with me. She came in, she was very, very quiet. She could hardly say two words. In fact, she didn't want to work in front of the group because she was embarrassed. And I said to her, what's the embarrassment? She said, I'm very unlovable in my family. And I said to her, okay, tell me about that. She said, well, my brother, my father, and my mother get on very, very well. They're very kind of clinical, cold people. And as a kid growing up, I only ever got very little drops of love, just little drops of love. And it's so embarrassing. I'd like to be close to them, but that's all I got. And I wish I was closer. And I wish I knew what to do. I don't know if I'm good enough. And I said to her, so you've grown up. Are you a mom? She said, yes. And I said, talk to me about being a mom. And she said, I'm a great mom. My kids love me. I do really well, but I don't with my family. And I said to her, hold on a minute. Let's look at your family. Well, it turns out her family came from Germany during the time when it was Holocaust and we had all of those things happening. And for her family, there was very little joy. In fact, it was, we survived, we should be grateful, the end. She was what you call a much later child. So she was born long after that. And so she comes in almost as a new generation, right? And here's this little bubble, and she's looking for joy, and all she gets is these teeny tiny little drops of love. And she said, I don't even know how to connect to my family. And I said to her, actually, you do. And so we had a look, and I said to her, look at this. Your family only had little drops of love to give, didn't they? Yes. And they gave that to you, didn't they? Yes. What did you do with it? She said, I grew lots of love. I said, yeah. You did what they couldn't. They gave you what they could. Now you're doing what you can with what they gave you. Do you understand that you were the next step and the legacy of joy that was looking to emerge? I think she probably cried for about an hour, and she walked out going, I got it. This is how I connect. I'm the next step. It's fine. They gave me what they could. When we know that our parents have given us what they can, even if it's just life, and we take it exactly the way that it's been given to us, we now have the opportunity to turn it into something incredible.
How
Sure.
can people find out more about you and your work?
Okay, so a number of ways. My website is Judy Wilkins Smith.com. And then they can look me up on Instagram and Facebook.
We've been speaking with family patterns expert Judy Wilkins Smith.